Here we are, Renee, another episode. It looks like we're both out and about today.
Yeah. So today I am on the road in New Orleans, and it looks like you're on the farm.
I am on the farm. It's planting season, so I'm a lot of time in the tractor this week, Renee. A lot of time in the tractor.
I don't have a tractor, everybody. So you should feel sorry for me. No, don't. All right, so today, Jason, we're going to talk about the conference that I'm attending. I'm at the conference with the Associations of Paroling Authorities International. And this year, our conference title is Unlocking Potential in Evidence-Based Parole Making Decisions. And I'm really excited about this because parole is actually one of the last groups that really talk about evidence. There's so much you and I talk about all the time in evidence-based in the realm of behavioral health. But man, in parole, there just really hasn't been a lot. And they were talking again. I'm always just so surprised by the numbers, but there's only several hundred of us parole members throughout a country at the time, at any given time, and yet we release hundreds of thousands of people in a year. And so there's like a small minority of people that have this very large responsibility, and it's a very unique job and skill set. So this group is working on standardizing and making care and all that. So today we're going to have a conversation about some of the things though that actually apply to all of our audience related to change and resisting change and all of those good things because it's the same when you have to make changes to whatever it is that you do in life. There's always going to be some pushback. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So on the farm, though, Jason, you just said that you're there and you're working and planting, and but didn't you have like a small problem this spring with the
Well,
weather?
there's been a couple glitches. And so, there was a glitch, I one whole morning got wasted because I got the tractor stuck. I was out field cultivating and my brother-in-law was planting or trying to get a lot done. And I just buried the tractor out middle of the field in a mud hole. So it just had to sit there for half a day until we could find a tractor big enough to come pull me out. And so there's been that. I've got some chemicals stuck in Illinois because they're mixing it. It's a way to more cheaply put on, some of our nutrients, and they had a different supplier, and so the stuff they add wasn't staying in suspension. And so, if you mix chemicals wrong, it either salts out or it gels up, and we need it to be in liquid form to run through our planter. So we need about 3,000 gallons of liquid that's appropriately mixed so I can finish the rest of my beans.
Hmm,
So,
problem,
that's
problem.
kind of how things go right now.
Yep.
So it's just a lot of
Yep.
fixing stuff and waiting.
Yep. For all of you that don't really think chemicals and you aren't a farmer, we had the chemical issue on our HOA last year where they used the exact same thing for years and years and years, and they did something wrong, and we had polka dots, and polka dots were
Yeah.
hilarious. It was supposed to kill
Yeah.
dandelions, ended up killing some big splotches of grass. So by this time last year, it looked like cows with brown spots, and so it happens. Chemicals are really important. Well, today we're
Yeah.
going to dive into a really interesting conversation. I met a new person in my world named Dr. Alexandra Walker, and she's from the Alliance for Community and Justice Innovations. And she has had a really interesting background all in corrections. So she's one of these people that have worked all the ranks of corrections, Rikers Island, even just doing research and working with hard people. But she's talked to us about implementation science. And really, I didn't know all these words, but this is like what you and I do on the behavioral health side every
Hmm.
day. It's really we don't think about it. She's more on the research side of things and looking at the science behind it, but it really is what we talk about related to change and helping people actually implement because you and I are always talking about we do all these reports, we do all of these things, and they sit in the cloud, and then nothing ever comes of it. And she even told a story of one of those. She was very excited to get on this governor's appointed panel, and she was the only one who thought the big changes were going to happen, and everybody else on the panel is like, I don't know why you're so excited. Nothing's going to come of this, which is the typical, unfortunately, for
Yeah.
most of that. And so today we're going to kind of dive into that. So when you think about implementation science, I know you guys do this all the time, and maybe not in these exact words, but you're out there talking to hospitals, talking about systems, and you're wanting them to do something different. And I'm certain on your journey, you've run into people who just don't really want to do it different.
Well, it's funny because as we were talking about doing this episode, it kind of made me think about, everyone we talk to generally wants something to change. They want to
Mhm.
do it differently. But kind of to your point, I think this is what we're going to dive into. Everybody wants someone else to change. it's when it comes back and there's kind of a mirror put in front of them that then it's like, whoa, we can't have any part of that. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of funny as I think about all the conversations, that's all we have anymore is conversations with folks who say, yeah, we need to change this because it's not working for us, which is a great conversation until the rubber hits the road. And then we have
Right.
to really detail out who needs to make the changes. And then that's when it gets tough, Renee.
Yeah. And in many cases, it's change on all sides. Everybody can usually improve. When you're not collaborating, when you're not speaking, when you're not working together, there's always multiple sides to that issue. It's never just one side. There may be the most difficult one person to get along with, and so maybe you think it's pretty one-sided, and it may be an 80-20 or a 90-10, but there's always a piece that you could respond different, act different, listen
Yeah.
different, whatever you need to set a boundary so that that could go better. And so even if you've got the most difficult person in your mind that you're like, no way it's 100% their fault, almost never is it 100% somebody's fault. And so that's what's really interesting about this research that Dr. Walker was talking about is really thinking about resisting change and kind of those people that get stuck there. So she was telling us that when you think about like an iceberg and the person on the top, and they're the ones that are telling you, yeah, everybody else should change, not me. But below the surface, there's what they call threats to people, then they feel threatened. And so the real story, the whole point of this conversation is when you hit that change, you got to ask questions. You got to find out more. What are they so resistant? Why are they resistant to change? What's that about? So she gave us four categories. I'll talk about them just briefly. But one is a threat to their autonomy. None of us like to be told what to do. That's simple, but autonomy, I'll run through them first and I'll come back around. But like your expertise, people are expertise in their area and they know the most. And so when there's new research that may change or challenge what they're thinking, right? Then there's fear of getting it wrong. Some people, this is the only way they know, and if you change it, they're going to be wrong, and that's a fear. So they're like, can't make changes because that's the only way I know how to do it. And then the last one is their identity. And we crash into these all the time. So before we dive into those a little deeper,
Yeah.
Jason, you've got people in mind that you're thinking, oh yeah, I've run into this.
Well, it just, remember there's that old adage, it may not be good, but I understand it, right? It may not be great, but I know how to navigate it. That's how the system I've learned all the way through. So let's just keep it the same way because I know where the shortcuts are in this
Yeah.
system. So
Yeah.
why would I want to change something and then have to relearn everything? And really that goes to, autonomy and expertise because if you start all over, then everyone's on an equal playing field. I have to
Mm,
relearn it along with my competitor. Whereas you may have a perceived idea that you have an advantage in a
mm,
system that's really dysfunctional
mm,
because you may have a better understanding of it within that dysfunction.
mm. Yeah, 100%. So I think about to give us some examples. So if we go back through them, like autonomy, you know, I hit this one myself. Like if I'm working with a nutritionist, if I've got a issue and they tell me you shouldn't eat blank to help do whatever, to heal something, to change, I'm like my knee gut reaction is, who are you to tell me I can't eat blank? I mean, it's just like that's what I want to do. I want to make choices for myself. And that's natural for anybody and everybody. Dealing with my parents as they were aging, autonomy was number one with them.
Mhm.
It was like they want to make the choices. They wanted to be in charge, even if mentally capacity wasn't really there. That was not the issue. They wanted to still feel in control. So you had to couch your conversations about giving them choice, even if you limited the options, giving people choice, right? So you start thinking about expertise again. You and I work with people. We're like the up and comers still somewhat. I mean, we are getting older, but we're still not at the top of that game.
Speak for yourself.
Hey now.
Go
But we're
on.
not at the top, and there are people that have gone before us that they get threatened by new ideas or the way we see it or whatever because they've done it longer, better, different, whatever. And that's for everybody. I mean, we're going to be the same way with the youngers coming behind us. It's just a thing. But if you, as long as you're aware of it. Getting it wrong. There are people, especially folks that are kind of neuroatypical. Some of those folks learn things a certain way and they get comfortable in doing it. And then when you change it, there's a fear that maybe they can't keep up. Maybe they can't learn it again. Maybe they'll be confused and do it the wrong way when this was the right way. And so sometimes it really is a legitimate fear that maybe I can't do that. And it aging, sometimes if it's a new technology, a new something, something more complicated or different, the people that have always done it might be confused and concerned that get it
Well,
wrong. And then
Yeah, we live
identity,
in a
of course, you tie who you are to your job maybe. And if
yeah.
I'm no longer, we think about this in farming. I'll just lean it right to you for you. But you think about, we talk about this, right? If they're no longer a farmer, who am I? You just had that episode come out on our
Mhm.
podcast, and that's so tied in. They're a farmer for all the ages, and they could retire, but then who would they be, right? And you tell them to do it different, and they know because they've done it so long. That's identity. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple of thoughts. It's really, thinking about how do you change things when you get comfortable? And that's the hard part of change is we only change, we really only do things differently when we get so uncomfortable we have to. And I think that's the interesting part as we think about implementation science is generally we're only going to make changes, and this is for anything, is when things become so uncomfortable we have to change. That's kind of just being a human.
Yeah.
And so as we think about, changing things midstream, relearning our roles, rethinking about our identity, those are really hard things to do, especially if you've been doing this work a long time. I mean, I think of a lot of the CEOs we work with who've been doing this for, decades, literally. It does get hard. You get stuck. You get kind of just in your groove and you just want to keep doing that and you just want to coast. And we
Yeah.
all know coasting isn't good for anybody. If I've learned anything over the last decade, it's how do you stay relevant is you got to be bouncing around, you got to be thinking differently, you got to be questioning yourself, you got to be pushing yourself to change, and without that push people just don't do it, Renee.
No. And what Dr. Walker was really good at pointing out is that it really takes you out of your autopilot. So you think about, I mean, and I'm sure this happened to you when you just said your tractor got stuck. You were probably in some ways doing what you've always done and you weren't really, you're just doing it. And so once that happened, then you're like, wait, and then you're like jolted out of the autopilot of
Right.
that's not exactly what you were expecting to happen. You had a plan, it was going to go,
Mhm.
it was on the right route, the whole thing,
Right.
right? And then it wasn't. Well, they said that one of the things that when we all get worked up when we need somebody to change and when they push back, it's because their cognitive brain actually has to function differently. You can't be on autopilot. You actually have to think that I
Right.
have to do it different. And so they're like, that induces feelings and often feelings of irritation or tiredness. And in parole, it's a really bad thing for parole to be on autopilot because I'm supposed to
Mhm.
be looking at each person individually as the day goes. But if you get into that autopilot where you only look at a little bit of information and you're leaning one direction, you could easily just start batching people together without doing the work that needs to happen. So part of the conversation was also about like how do you help people realize that they can't go on autopilot on some of this
Right.
stuff. You actually have to use your brain. And yes, it is exhausting. They gave us like lists of what some of those things are when you're tired. And we know them, but we think about them a lot. But some of those things that happen when you're tired of making decisions, right? You have that analysis paralysis,
Yeah.
this decision fatigue we talk about, even just being physically tired or exerted. And then if you continue down that path, you could end up leading to burnout and leading to chronic health issues and things. And so there's all this conversation about what it can lead to, but we don't think about it. We just get irritated that they just won't do what you need them to do in the way you want it done. And in reality, their reaction is natural because now their brain has to work harder, and we need to give them that space that it's going to take longer to change.
Right. And if you think about it, the analogy of physically getting stuck, think about the last time you're in your car in a snowstorm, or if you ever go off-roading, think about the last time you literally got stuck. Like if you don't take the off-ramp when you have the chance to not get stuck, generally what happens is you push the accelerator harder. And
Yeah.
then the harder you push, the deeper you get stuck. The more mud, the slicker the tires get, the farther you start moving down, you start sinking,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That happens to all of us. Is once you've made your choice that you're going to keep going forward, you commit, and you're going to get more stuck
Yeah.
before you ever get out. And to make it worse, you're going to have to ask for help to get out because you're going to get so stuck that there's nothing more you can do. No matter how
Yeah.
much harder you push the accelerator, no matter how much you try to pull forward and go backwards, there comes a point when you're so stuck you're done. And with so many, but that's the epitome of burnout, Renee.
Yeah.
Is
Agreed.
when you're still heads down, trying to go forward, and the tires are all spinning, and you're not going anywhere.
No,
And the
you're not
only way
going
you're getting out of that is somebody's gonna have to pull you out. And so
anywhere.
that's really a great metaphor as we think about having this conversation, because
Mm,
we have to have awareness to not get ourselves in that swamp. We all
right.
are going to end up there at some point,
Right.
but we need to try to have as much awareness as we can.
Right. And the other thing it really does is it challenges you to think about what's on autopilot and making sure that the autopilot parts of your life make sense. Because so many things go into autopilot and they may be bad. So we think about health habits. There's good habits to have that are automatic and there's bad habits to have that are automatic. And if you let yourself go to that automatic thought process, which is fine to do, you don't remember driving your drive home or whatever. But I just remember last week, as a matter of fact, when I leave from downtown Des Moines, I could go two different directions to get to my house, and it's about equidistant on a given day. Both pathways, because I happened to put into GPS, both pathways were blocked with accidents. So then you have to literally at the end of my day, I've made all these decisions all day. Now it's not, I mean, I could have just sat in the traffic and, like you said, just get stuck. Or I was like, I'm gonna have to make a different choice and go a different route. So I ended up going through town, which took a little longer, but still was faster than I would have been stuck in the afternoon traffic, but just kind of crazy. And so you think about people though that they automatically do things. And when you get into bad habits, and then so that's some of the stuff we're talking about here is you have to, first of all, you have to acknowledge it with somebody. Sometimes people don't always acknowledge that they have those problems, but then help them move through that because they're going to be resistant and irritated with you. So when we think about that, there's data related to this. And how many people really like change? I mean, does this really work? I mean, what are we even talking about?
Well, nobody likes change. That's the thing. And if you look at the data, I was just pulling some stuff from Harvard Business School and Forbes. 70% of organizations fail to meet objectives when they try to start new initiatives because of
Yeah.
resistance. 76% of all initiatives will experience some form of resistance to change. And I think that's especially important to think about in your world because there's less people paroled year over year than ever, and so we have a growing prison, overcrowding across our country. And so this is an area that we really need to dig into and figure out what's going on, of why are we being ineffective, and why do we just keep locking people up? Because that's essentially what we're doing across the country.
Well, and when you look at it from the resistance to change perspective and the fact that people don't like to change, when you're tired of making decisions, sometimes you feel like the safest decision is to not make one, so just to leave them. And that's a
Yeah,
problem because again, we're getting into autopilot and so we're not really thinking through all the criteria to make a good decision. We're exhausted making decisions. And so now we're just going to do what's safest and in our minds that means make no decision or leave them where they are because we don't want to take the risk of letting them go. And so again, you get back into that same situation and you're right, more and more people are getting incarcerated. And what's really, really bad, and we just finished the legislative session in Iowa, and what was really, really bad is they have this three strikes law and they didn't weed out the types of people. And one of the ones that now can have a 7 year mandatory minimum are criminal mischief, like you took somebody's cell phone. But it's also people that get like low level drug offenses and that typically are due to being addicted. And so now they can be in for a habitual offense. And they also didn't let it start over. So if you already have other felonies, even in other jurisdictions, they're all going to move into Iowa prisons. Brilliant. And so, now we're going to house everybody else's people that they've let out because we're just going to capture them all here. And like as if we had the population space to do so.
right,
So it's really, really bad choices, but it's a fear. It's back to that fear of like, well,
right.
we can't trust them. We don't want our state to turn into California. What are we even talking about, right? But it was
Mhm.
fear-based and not even real fear-based. It was ginned up fear-based to make
Right.
really bad choices. And now people that shouldn't be incarcerated because that's not going to fix the problem are going to be incarcerated at a much greater rate in our state. Now those three strike laws landed in the 80s and the 90s. And do you know all the research shows that they were terrible ideas? So we are
Mhm.
30 years behind doing something that didn't work 30 years ago because certain people at the legislature won't listen. That's insane, but that's where we are. And it lands right in here. The resistance to change because they had a great idea. And because of ego and identity, and they're
Right.
they're the in charge, large and in charge, they think they can shove stuff through, and that's just bad. And so it's bad. It makes bad policy. And then there's going to be fallout. So I don't know how they're going to fix this moving forward. It may not be as big a fallout for me in my tenure, but wish well the next person because good luck to
Mhm.
them. So let's talk about some stories about when we were crashed into resistance to change. You've never crashed into that while you're working out on the road, Jason, and behavioral health.
I
That's never happened.
it crashes into me all the time because I open my mouth and ask questions, Renee.
Right.
Um, and then it just blows up a lot of times. It kind of goes back to what you're talking about, right? Like we experience one thing when we're out meeting with people. And so when we're in the room with leaders or with folks, we just ask the questions of why is this working or why isn't this working? And boy, the pushback we get, a lot of times we're doing these landscape analysis. So we're in rural and frontier communities.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to our last episode, it was so frontier I couldn't even get the
Mm-mm.
internet
Mm-hmm.
to even have a Zoom meeting, right? Um, and so when we think about, what we're out there, we're talking to people on the ground who are utilizing things. And my favorite thing to talk about is resource guides, because everywhere we go, there's these resource guides that are going to guide us where to go for everything. And people take great pride in putting together their resource guides. It's kind of like buildings, right? Like, people want to show you their building. Well, that has nothing to do with the services or what they do. It's just a building, right? And I get it. Have pride in the things that you build, but what is it that you do? How are you giving an impact to your community? And so I ask questions sometimes about these resource guides of like, if I was just because I am an outsider, if I just moved to your community, I was trying to look something up, I don't know how I would be able to do that with the way that
Right.
this resource guide is laid out or how it's organized. It doesn't make any sense to me. And boy, have I offended people, Renee.
Right.
I have really offended people.
So just to continue on the conversation that Jason just had, but also circle back to those resistant to change folks, asking questions is actually your way through. It's not going to be comfortable, but we absolutely have to do that. And as consultants, that's our job to ask hard questions because you get here, you get stuck. And so there's times where people, it's the way it's always been, and it's because of Sally Sue, and she said so. It's not a rule, it's not a law, not a policy, and then nobody questions it. Sally Sue moves on, still happening, those kind of things. But then there's other times where you hit you hit it, and then they're just like that person is absolutely not. And so you're like, okay, but that's not the evidence. That's not what it's showing. So tell me more what that's about, right? And people get really mad, but when you uncover it, you keep having to ask why and why and why and why. Sometimes you can get to the root issue of what the issue is, and you're like, wait, that doesn't make you and if it's an identity issue, it doesn't make you a bad board member that you have to change your mind because you didn't know better before and now you know new information and you're going to make a better decision today than you did before because you didn't know
Right.
better. So you made the best decisions you could have made then. But now you know different. And so now you're responsible to do better. And so some personalities though really get stuck with that because they wanted to be perfect before when they didn't know. And so part
Right.
of that for us in behavioral health, and that's why behavioral health, why I love psychology, why I love the way people's brains work, it works across all industries. This principle we're talking about works with everybody. They've behaved a certain way because that's what's worked up until today.
Mhm.
And if nobody questions it, it's always going to continue. So it takes an outsider to be like, why is that? Why are you so bent out of shape about a resource guide? It's
Mhm.
paper. What are we talking about? And that's a really good example. Do you have another example that you're thinking of that comes to mind when you're thinking about resistance to change?
Well, I think about, we frequently and over the years, and I think back to my time managing outpatient clinics, I always go back to thinking about productivity and productivity standards and folks who come in, and I'm guilty, right? Of we got to balance the budget. So everyone needs to see more patients. We still hear about this in clinics when we're out and about. And that always is just a hot mess, Renee. There's ways to go about doing that and onboarding everyone.
Right.
But you talk about a change that can build resistance. You tell a group of therapists they have to see 10 more patients a week.
Mm,
Or you tell a physician that he needs to see, five more
mm,
patients a day, and they already feel overwhelmed. And they're already burned out. It's like kind of like throwing gasoline on a fire sometimes, when
Right.
you really don't understand the science of how do you onboard, how do you bring people along, and how do you build in efficiencies so that that's actually attainable.
Yeah, for whatever reason, my brain is shooting back to some of our North Dakota early work together when we were standing in those massively large clinics with no people in them. And
Right,
they had this terribly low caseload and were not making budget. And because
right,
they had the case management for life. So everybody in the
right,
world that had ever been in, they got to keep on their caseload, even if they weren't currently seeing any of them. So
right,
they filled their caseload, but they didn't actually have to work. Boy, the
right.
resistance to make that different was so palpable in the room,
Yeah.
but it was so wrong. It was so broken, so
Yes.
wrong, so historically terrible that they've changed since then. But we had to sort of ask those questions like, are you
Right.
serious? And when you called it case management for life and people heard it, they were like, wait, what? And we're like, well, that's what you said because you basically
Right.
have to die to get off the rolls. And they were like, oh, yeah. Oh, they're not active, like active case manage, active people you see. They just were there once upon a time and they're not dead yet. Or you didn't go back and clean up your list once they died. So therefore, they're holding a spot. So you have no openings. That's weird. And so that is that conversation. But it is, again, it's about change because they've always done it that way. And those people that were on the winning side of that, the OGs, who got zero caseload while the new people were coming in and
Mhm.
expecting to actually have a full caseload of people who actually came in. How
Right.
completely inequitable, right? They had the same total number of cases, but they had like 5 or 10 actives total, and this one had the 40 to 50 active. And then they couldn't figure out why they couldn't keep new people. That's terrible. And so,
Yeah.
again, in resistance to change, if you understand that the change is coming, you should be, as a consultant and a person who's helping, bold to say it. You're going to expect the resistance, expect the sass, expect the bad attitude, but it still has to be said. And hopefully, said in a way with compassion and kindness and ask more questions to really get into what in the world's that about, because that's just silly. Like you said, that's just a really weird that's a very, very weird policy. That's wrong. So how did you get there and why are you there?
And we don't spend enough time helping organizations understand how to manage the resistance, because I really think that's a key element here. Is there's always going to be a certain level of resistance. I think of the work we're doing right now in Colorado, Renee, that that change has been coming for 3 to 5 years. We've known the coal industry is going to shut down, but there's still communities hanging on to hope that it's gonna stay. Well, the coal mine's out of coal. That's why they're closing some of the coal mines. Like, they've mined it all. So this has nothing to do with any of the other overtones. It's like it's just done. They can't keep doing some of the things they've always done, but there's still always going to be a certain level of resistance. So, part of it is we have to figure out how to manage through that, how to bring people along, because everyone's going to phase in differently. Everyone's going to come to their own realities over time differently. But that makes it really hard, especially if you're in a workplace.
Yeah. One of the topic that Dr. Walker was talking about was being resilient and having optimism as a key to doing that and being resilient, especially when work like this where it gets stuck and it gets muddy and it gets tedious and you still are trying to get through it to get to the other side because you know the other side's better, but this change resistance piece is so yucky. And they were talking about like making sure you keep your brain and your mouth going in the same direction where you
Yeah.
continue to speak the vision, you continue to talk about the positive, even in the messy middle. Because if you just start focusing on the mess, your eyes are going to go straight to that and get stuck.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can continue to look past the mess, yes, we are not ignoring the mess, but we know it's there. We know some folks are hard to come around, but you keep speaking the vision, keep speaking where we're headed, keep speaking that these are the changes ahead, how it's going to get better, whatever that is, to get through that middle. And that is how you help lead people to the other side of that change, which
It-
is stuff you and I do all the time. Because when you can
right.
give them some time to adapt to the idea of it, to have to listen to their concerns, help them identify what the issue is, and if it's them that they have to figure out what they're going to do about that, but continue saying, in spite of that, we're still going this direction. And like the work you're doing with the coal mines, they're still
See,
closing and you're still not
right.
going to have a job, or we can help you move and transition to
And
another industry that works.
be that one voice of hope in the meeting, right? Be that person that's going to say, we are going to do this, and this is how we're going to be successful.
Hmm.
We've been in meetings and we're the consultants, and everyone in the room turns to us and looks and goes, can we really do that? We're like, absolutely we can. Now, you know, we wouldn't be there. We wouldn't have set the goal if we didn't think it was an achievable goal.
That's right.
Might we fall short in 2 years? Maybe. Are we going to do far better than where we're at today? 100%. But we have to be the voice of hope in that room, because in the absence of that, there is no voice of hope in that room. And I think
No.
we underestimate that a lot, right? Like we have to
Yeah.
be there constantly cheerleading and saying, of course, we're going to be able to do this. And this is how we're all going to do it together. We can always make changes. We can always do better. We can always move the needle forward, but we have to be moving forward. We can't just put our hands on our heads or start banging our foreheads on the table because we see all of these barriers that are going to come. There's always going to be barriers coming along. That doesn't
Right.
mean we're not going to overcome them each time, right? Each time one comes at us, we're going to figure out a way through it. We're going to strategize. We're going to move through it. We're going to slog through, and we're going to keep moving forward. And that's part of managing the resistance to change, is staying hopeful, keeping everyone focused, and seeing that
Mhm.
this is the light on the other end. This is the light at the end of the tunnel that we're trying to get to.
Yeah. And you really focus on the things that we have control to change. Some things
Right.
you don't have control to change. And those aren't the things that you want to be hopeful about. But we can change our attitudes. We can change,
Yeah.
we can change how we feel in the change. We can change of like how we look at it, how we speak about it, how we review it. We can think about what is going right in the middle of this messy season. There's always bright spots in the mess, but we always miss it sometimes because we get so bogged down on what's negative. So you got to be careful with your own self-talk and your own
Yeah.
how where your focus is, because where your focus goes, that's what you're going to focus on, and that's the negative is going to. It's easier to see. So one of the things I've done just in my office, it's very simple, and they're still really bad at it. 2.5 years in, I start every meeting with, "Okay, talk to me about the wins. What's going on good at the board of parole?" And they're silent every time because it's natural to tell
Yeah.
me the thousands of things that are wrong. It's not natural, 2.5 years in, when it's always the first question, to say, "Oh," and then they stop and they think, but they know the next thing out of their mouth better be positive. And it usually is, but it takes a minute to like, "Oh, well, this actually worked." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Awesome. What else?" And I stay on that for several minutes because our pump is so primed. All the text threads are complaining about somebody else and what's wrong
Mhm.
and all that. That's the natural blah, 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 blah. So it's like, no, we're on a mission. We're going this direction. There's good things happening. So what is it? And talk to me about
Yeah.
that. And then it kind of changes the tone of the meeting because we're not all just bitching about stuff in a meeting. It becomes, "Hey, this is the good stuff. This is some of the," then we go into like some of the projects we're working on, the strategic stuff we're doing, and kind of like these are the directions we're going. Are we all there yet? No. Is today perfect? Heck no. And is the job still hard? Yes. But hey,
Mhm.
there's some hope, right? So you try to couch your beginnings of life with hope, and that really has helped. But it's not natural. It's easier just to start off with, "Okay, what's the top 10 things you're all pissed off about today? Please tell me." And they could rattle that off.
And it's easy when you work for a large institution to get stuck in the minutia and the bureaucracy, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I'll give you a consultant secret. Sometimes when we just work for states, we can just go AWOL. And I'll give you an example, right? Like, we needed a website designed, and that was going to take the state a whole long time, and they weren't even sure they could. And so we left a meeting, and within half an hour, we developed a splash page that we could put a QR code to give the information we needed to get out. And so sometimes we lead by just thinking outside of the box and being like, wait a minute, we own a website and we can add a secret website under our own website domain, and we can make a QR code, and we can literally do that sitting in a restaurant in half an hour.
Yeah.
That could have taken 6 developers 6 weeks within the state IT infrastructure, right, Renee? Because that's just how these things work. Um, we
Right.
got it done, and then we could model that and say, "Oh, oops, we weren't supposed to do that, but this is how easy it can be
Right.
if we just
I
want to do that."
I had an epiphany at this conference already. I had a very wise woman tell me that I needed to send a weekly email to the governor's office once I got this position to tell them, my metrics and what I'm up to on the. Did you know it never occurred to me to do that to the legislature? Why
Oh,
not?
yes.
And so they're making terrible decisions without consulting
Yeah.
any of us at all. And I have done nothing to encourage them to actually get information.
Mm,
How hard is that? It's literally telling
yeah.
my staff to create me a,
Yes.
a list. I'm going to have an email, whatever you call that, where I have a group, and I'm going to put the judicial committees of the two chambers and whatever, and then I'm just going to start sending
Yes.
them information, and I'm going
Yes.
to send it to them. I don't know if it'll do every week because that might be a lot, but it's going to be pretty often. And I'm going to start now after session. And then by the time we get around to it next year, somebody's going to say, hey, we should ask blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
But it didn't even occur to me. And I've been doing the right thing in some spaces. But I was sitting in this meeting and I'm like, holy cow, I could have been doing that the whole time too. And maybe
Yep.
I wouldn't be where I'm sitting now with some of this legislation. So part of
Yep.
that, again, back to the very beginning of our podcast, that bad communication, that part's my fault. 100% my fault
Mhm.
because I didn't even give it to them in a way that they could have taken it if they wanted to. I just didn't do it. And so can't blame them for not knowing things that I never tried to teach. So it's like, that's what we're talking about here is like, okay, they're making bad choices, yes, but did I do anything to give them the right? I mean, I tried, but not this way. So it's like, oh, a new idea, a new way to
So
consider.
you just hit the most important thing, and I don't know if you realize this or not, but this is how we all learn. We have to go to conferences and
Yeah,
continuing ed and talk with our peers from across the country. And if you can't find people across the country, I left the country and went to Canada to learn this
right.
year because you go out and seek out, I go out, you go out and seek out the very smartest people to learn from. And we all should be doing that because that helps us to better understand where we have resistance to change. Because when we're exposed to new ideas, are we going to come back and implement those? And so we both spend a lot of time at conferences, whether we're speaking at them or attending them to learn. We
Yeah.
do that to grow. And I think so oftentimes, what's the first thing to get cut? Sending someone to a conference. Even if
Right.
it's an in state conference, they're going to go learn one or two tidbits that they're going to come back and be a better employee. And I think that is the last thing we should ever cut is going training your employees and sending them to whatever conference they want to go to that they're going to
Mhm.
glean something that's going to make them a better employee. And so oftentimes that's what's missing when it comes to development and helping people to manage change, right? This all comes full circle. If we
Mhm.
have a full understanding and we're out learning from other people, then we're going to realize how that change can be impactful and successful in our own organizations.
Yep. And that really ties into my recovering politician self-care policy of the week. One of the pieces that they were talking to us about is it's not getting the same information from people that think just like you. And when I'm at a parole conference, almost zero states do it the same way. And so one of the
Mhm,
challenges you have is as you're listening to different people, you can't do everything that they're saying because some people are embedded within corrections and some people have, like California and New York have, oh, so many resources and such a big system. Texas is humongous. And so sometimes you're just like, none of this applies, none of this applies. But to your point, you're hearing voices that are different and from all political sides, blue states, red states, all over the place. But in it, sometimes it triggers an idea. And so when you're listening, you don't wipe it out because they're not like you. You're like, they're different than us and they're different for reasons and they've been more established than us, have a different programming or whatever. And I found it so valuable. And that was one of the key takeaways from that conversation about resisting change is having those voices that are different than you. So yes, it's fine to go to a conference with all your peers. Yes, but I challenge you to go to different ones. And you and I have done that where you've ended up in some very red conferences and I've ended up with you in some very blue
mhm,
conferences and you hear it differently that way because even if it's just political difference, let alone urban
mhm.
rural differences where you and
Right,
I end up very different conferences.
right.
And but it's been really good because that helps our collaboration as a business because we're taking a wide picture of what works. And so you and I don't just do just rural conferences, we do urban conferences. I'm doing international conferences. You go to some
Mhm.
international conferences so that you get pictures from. I mean, there's a guy here from the Virgin Islands. What's really wild
Mhm.
about that? They have no prisons in the Virgin Islands. Their prisons are in
Really?
American states. So they
Mhm.
travel to Florida, to Mississippi, to South
Yeah,
Carolina for their parole hearings. That's wild. So if I'm going to complain about logistics, my brain now is thinking,
right.
wow, Virgin Islands has it a lot worse than I do. And so it just gives you again perspective, right? So it's like really kind of cool to learn. I mean, we're all different, but yet you can learn from each other. And I think that's the takeaway today in this conversation is one,
Mhm.
people are going to be resistant to change because that's how your brain works. So don't be mad at somebody for being resistant to change. Your brain has to now work harder to make the change. So of course you're going to be more irritated. It's going to take more effort. So that just know that. So then you're not fighting, you're not upset that people are going to push back. You just know. And then secondarily, figure out why. Ask good questions. If they're pushing back, they care, which is awesome. And then why? Then there's a reason. We went through those reasons, right? There could be their who they based on who they are, or fear or whatever. Talk it out. And then, like Jason said, and just gave us a great idea, make sure you hit up conferences or places or people where you can get better ideas. Books. I read so many books sometimes to just get information or listen to podcasts to get new ideas and go, and they challenged us to do that actually today, Jason. They were saying these are the typical groups of people that Parole
Yeah.
listens to. But then they gave us this whole other group of types of people that you could get ideas that might apply if you listen to it from that perspective. So, any thoughts to you about your self-care policy? I know you're more of a podcast guy, especially on the move, listening to stuff, but you get ideas, I'm sure, on the radio and things that you hear when you're out and about.
I do. I get ideas, and to the point I have to write them down. So like the notes app on my phone is
Yeah.
I need to spend a day just going recategorizing the notes app because I'll write down a quick idea or I'll think about a project and then quick take a note, right? So I don't forget
Yeah.
it. So it stays top of mind. I will tell you lately I've fallen back into the just listening to music in the tractor again
Uh-oh.
because sometimes you just have to drown. I go back and forth.
Well,
Like every now and then I spend a country day and then I'll do a pop day and then I'll do a, classic rock day. So it kind of just depends on when I hop in the tractor
Well, I'm
these
not
days.
gonna say anything about that because I too am in New Orleans. So I was out with the band, the Funky
Yeah.
Monkeys, folks, and they're
Yeah.
amazing. And they cover all the tunes and all the genres.
Yeah.
And so we had such a great
Yeah.
time. Am I tired today? Yes. Would I take it back? No, because way too
Yeah.
great to talk about good music. So,
Yep.
well, thanks everybody for listening. We're talking about resisting to change. We'll put some things in the show notes so you can connect. Put in there the conference so you can see what else we learned here. The lot we could learn about change and being optimistic in that change. We'll put all those notes in there. But next time, we'll see you again soon. Have a great day, everybody.